Art making is an act of bravery. When we let go of the side of the pool, we release ourselves from the creative preconceptions that hold us and our work back, and give our work permission to change.
Welcome to Daring to Tell, the podcast where writers read their true stories of personal daring and we talk about writing and life. I am your host, editor, interviewer, scriptwriter, producer, Michelle Rado.
Nothing's gonna make me brave, and nothing's gonna make me brave. Nothing's gonna make me brave except doing what makes me scared.
I've been thinking of this concept of differing hats lately. Often when I'm listening back to myself as I edit conversations with each of my writer guests, I await what I might say next with bated breath. My editing self thinks differently than my conversation self, who sat across from Elissa Altman in Phil's music studio, packed with instruments and microphones. Conversation Michelle was prepped to the eyeballs with notes, both handwritten and typed in a collated shuffle of papers and note cards. Sound editor Michelle, the self I feel sits in the very center of me, is in this endeavor for the listen. Sound editor Michelle gets to sit back, absorb, and clarify those words that came out of Conversation Michelle. Even now, hosting Michelle, talking alone in my own little office studio by myself, and imagining you listening, this is yet another tentacle of me. A less comfortable version of myself, I will admit, an arm that has to be attached to the center body, or maybe the better analogy is a newer ring that surrounds the center planet of sound editor Michelle. Each of these phases of putting together the podcast helped me think about it more, and as I have been putting this episode together, wow, it's been beyond words, really. Because how long can it take us and the various roles we play in the process of creating something for a nut of truth to come out? And truth can be such a sticky word. Maybe I should say a nut of knowing something about ourselves, about topics that run like rivers, as Elissa Altman will share with us, through families and through lifetimes. This has been a conversation, honestly, years in the making when I think about it. I first saw Elissa Altman speak at the 2024 Woodstock Book Fest. She must have been at some stage of her book permission at that point, but it wasn't what she was talking about. She was talking about the 8 lines in her first memoir, Poor Man's Feast, where she inadvertently revealed a nearly century-old family secret. That's right. She had no clue she was doing it. But I'll confess this a bit sheepishly in hindsight. I saw her book about cooking and I thought, I'm not really into cooking, and so I let it go by. Then there she was again in Woodstock on the very panel which I sponsored called Daring to Tell on Permission. So this was the book I have not been able to put down. The book I've been alternately both reading and listening to because I just can't get enough. Sometimes that's how it goes. You suddenly tumble into the stream of a theme that has been running through you. The book that spoke to yet another facet of me and the most reclusive of all facets of myself, writer Michelle. Okay, since all of these Michelles have been working on this episode so diligently, let's get to it because it is a biggie. May I present to you multi-memoirist and creative soul extraordinaire, Elissa Altman.
Thank you. That's lovely.
So, you are here in Maine. I was really excited when you said I could visit on May 9th because you just had a date in Portland talking about permission. I'm just wondering how the book tour is going.
I don't know where I am anymore. It's been really wonderful, actually, and the response to the book has been great, and I think permission is just such an important issue, and people want to talk about it, and there's always a lot to say, and it doesn't matter if people are writers, they're not writers.
Yeah.
It's very much the elephant in the room.
That I love that, because this is obviously a book. I shouldn't say obviously if people don't know it. This is a book that's about a lot more than writing. Mm-hmm. It's about creativity overall, which is so lovely because it is a part of everyone's life somehow. But it is, I will say, it is the memoirist's book. Right. This is the book I had no idea that I absolutely needed to read. So thank you.
Thank you.
As
thank you for
someone who is trying to write and encounters many of the chapters and the concepts that you explore. I tend to gush, and I'll try to keep that to a minimum. But one of the things I also love about this book is how you don't really offer any answers. You ask so many questions. And this is an endeavor where truly only the writer has the answers to the questions that we have when we're trying to write or create. And there are so many possibilities even, because I love that you address, do we have to, maybe you really need to write a story. Maybe you don't need to publish the story. I think we'll get to some
That's
of
a big
those
one.
things. That is a really big one. But also what I was thinking might be fun to start, and what I love hearing from writers that I talk to on Daring to Tell, is how they started writing. Like, where did it all begin for you?
That's a great question. It's a little weird and probably will sound canned to say that I started really, really young. And I remember, being 3 years old, and my parents were having a cocktail party, I think. So that would have been like 1966, 67. So probably fairly wild. And someone gave me a notebook, a soft cover, and I can see it. And it was like a brown merle cover with a black taped binding, and this, it was lined, but the lines were like really far apart.
Yeah.
And I just took it and I went into my bedroom with it, and I don't know what happened. I was 3, so I was probably not writing with anything but a crayon.
Right.
At that point. But I was just to have that notebook, it felt like someone sort of set off a spark in me. Yeah. And, I sometimes talk about synesthetic memory. I've got a synesthetic memory, and which is kind of crazy. And a lot of memoirists have it. Mary Carr's got it. A bunch of memoirists have it. Very common with memoirists, not common in the general public, within the general public. So I can remember things so vividly.
Wow.
Other things are just gone from my brain completely.
Yeah.
But there are like little visuals and bits and pieces. And that afternoon or that evening where the person gave me that book, I can see it. If somebody asked me to film it,
wow.
I could tell you every part of it.
Well, that makes me feel a little better to know. Because memory is one of the things. I have the worst memory ever.
Really.
And one of the reasons why I have journaled and still do is to remember anything going on in my life.
Yeah.
I think I know what synesthetic memory is. Mm-hmm. But can you describe it just so I...
Yeah, I was actually lucky to have a therapist at one of my book events, and I tried to describe it, and her head was kind of going, she was shaking her head yes, and then she was shaking her head no. So I'm sure that I will mangle this.
But you have your own experience,
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is basically a cross-hatching of sensory experience, sensory memory. So for me, if I... and this is something that whenever I talk about synesthetic memory, this is what comes up. When I am eating pizza, I will smell leather, and like burning leather. And the reason is because when I was growing up in Queens, across the street from us, there was a little pizzeria, just like a counter, and they shared a wall with a shoemaker. And I lived in that community from the time I was a year old to the time I was 18. So like that was a fixed thing.
Right.
You know, I'd go for a slice of pizza and I would smell and hear the spinning of the, you know, the spinning of the leather tools, of the shoemaker's tools. That's an example of a synesthetic memory. It doesn't work in the reverse for me. So if I smell leather, I don't taste pizza.
Right.
But that would be an example. That would be an example of
Yeah.
synesthetic memory.
Well, I think it's funny only because just last night when we were watching Jeopardy, as we do, one of the contestants talked about synesthetic memory.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she said, like, for example, she was talking with someone in junior high. She discovered other people weren't this way when she said, you know, oh, so you know how like the number 3 is orange. So I didn't know if that was a facet of.
That's an example of it.
Yeah.
And people might smell things if they see a certain number, or they might have a certain taste of something if they hear a kind of music. And it can be tactile, you know, it can be fabric, it can be any of those things. And it really changes from person to person as we have it. So,
But I can see how being a memory thing, it brings back all those tools that we try to use when we're writing.
right. And
So-
it is layered. It's nothing if not
Right.
if not layered. And I find it to be both a blessing and a curse, because there
Yeah.
are certain things that you don't really want to remember that super clearly.
Yeah.
But you know,
I know pizza and leather. It's like
it's kind of an
well,
odd thing, but
It doesn't stop you from eating pizza.
no, and it's oddly comforting. You know, it's
yeah.
oddly comforting.
Yeah.
And you know, I haven't been back in that. I haven't lived in that community since 1981.
Yeah.
81. So that's a long time, but it's
Yeah.
like yesterday. You know.
Yeah, that's wow. So the writing, your first journal was 3. Oh, we call it a journal. But
Right. Notebook. Right,
yeah,
right,
notebook.
right.
Do you still have it?
I don't have it. Although, you know, I mean, if I go through boxes at my mother's house,
Right.
it may be
Maybe.
there. Yeah.
And so what happened next? What did you like about it or bond with it or
Yeah, I just loved the possibility of the empty page. I also didn't have any siblings, so I grew up in a home in the 60s and 70s. You know, I had these 2 very creative parents who loathed each other. But, you know, it was like living in the ice storm, you know, in Rick
Yeah.
Moody's The Ice
Yeah.
Storm. And that was a function also of time, you know, and time and place. But there was art and music and writing and books everywhere in our house. And I started playing guitar actually when I was 4. So, you know, so that happened around the same time. And my dad was a great writer, and my mother was and is still a singer. So there was always a lot of action going on in our house. And around the time, I want to say I was a little bit older, and I always say this is something that no interviewer ever wants to hear, but I was a stutterer. And I was a stutterer because my parents were always at each other, and they would cut me off mid-sentence. And I realized that could only be helped for me by the presence of a journal, or the presence of the ability to write and the ability to tell stories. So if I was telling a story, even as a young child in single digits, and my parents cut me off, or anyone cut me off, I didn't have any other way to finish the story.
was it something that you wanted to finish so you'd go back intentionally
Yeah, you know, I think that certainly for adults this is the case, but absolutely for children. When children are telling stories, children are natural born storytellers. You know, when you sit down with a little kid, I love little kids, but when you sit down with a little kid and you talk to them, they usually sort of revert to a story. This thing happened at school, or I have this friend who did this, or my dog did, you know, fill in the blank, or I hate my teacher because, you know. And so I always wanted to be able to complete whatever story I was telling. You know?
So you were able to do that with your journal. And then, so I'm trying to like connect a few dots to get to some of the part of the book that I'm want to get to today. But I know you also went to Boston University.
Yes.
And I just have to share, you left in 85, which is when I started school at Northeastern.
Okay.
So I feel like we had some like little passings in the night or whatever. So what did you do in college? Were you doing writing by that point, or did you continue writing through high school?
Yeah, no, I was writing all the time through high school, and not for publication. I always had it in the back of my head, I think as every writer or wannabe writer does. You know, you close your eyes and then you envision what the book is going to look like, for better or for worse.
Right.
And I try and get my students to understand that's probably not a great thing to do, but it is human nature, and that's just what it is. But I was writing through high school. I was in public high school in Queens, and a great public high school. Forest Hills High School was wonderful, and I had some amazing English teachers. In middle school, I had an English teacher named Elissa Altman, who is now a very, very, and was then too, a very well-known photographer. And if you go onto Instagram, she actually is, her Instagram name is A Cup of Beauty, and she's pretty much everywhere, and I never realized how popular she was, but she was my 9th grade English teacher, and we came back together as friends after, this, so let's see, I left 9th grade in 1978, so 78 to 2000 and probably 17 or so, we had no contact. And then I was like, I wonder if this is the same Elissa Altman who was my English teacher. And it is, it was, and it is. And so we're now friends. We're now good friends. And she was very, very instrumental. She was an amazing teacher, and she made us read amazing things. And writing was very much a part of it. A part of the class. And then in high school, we had a great English department in high school, and a lot of reading, but also a lot of writing. And very often public high schools, they'll focus on one or the other depending on what the local curriculum is meant to be, but we did both. And then when I went to Boston University, I went into a program that was a 2-year solid, very rigorous liberal arts program, where it was a sort of a set program. You couldn't really take any other classes until the end of your sophomore year, and then you could sort of expand. And I knew that I was going to be an English major, that was what, much to my parents and family's dismay, because they, had great images of like, doctor or lawyer kind of thing. Like, what are you going to do with that? Right. And I had some wonderful professors. The book is dedicated to my students, but also to my professor, Linda Wells, who went on to become the dean of our college, and also enormously, instrumental and supportive of everything that I wrote back then, even, for papers and blue books and and things like that.
Right.
So I was writing all through that time, and also starting to keep journals in earnest at that point.
Right.
My parents were divorced by then. I had and continue to have, as most of my readers know, because of Motherland, a very cantankerous and difficult relationship with my mom. I shut my phone off so she doesn't call. And my watch, because she's already called twice this morning. She's 89 now, and still as cantankerous as ever. But I was keeping a journal. The journaling was not really a word back then.
Right.
But I was keeping a journal, and I would get probably 50 or 60 pages into it, and then I would get bored and my attention would go somewhere else. But I did that on and off.
Wow.
And then when I graduated, I went to work for Random House. So like right 2 weeks after college, I was working at Random House. So I was suddenly surrounded by words and writers and other writers and crazy editors and
well, I have to say, it just kind of sounds like a dream. Because again, sort of this weird parallel life thing. It's not It's not, but in high school, and I went to a very small, not so fantastic school in central Massachusetts that was, we didn't read too many books. I always say,
I'm so sorry.
They would have us watch the movie of the books.
Yeah, that like the Cliff Notes kind of. Yeah.
So I feel woefully underread, but there were things I caught up with. And I went to Northeastern, as I was mentioning.
Which is a great school. Great school.
Not for English, but I started off as an English major.
Yeah.
And then I sang with the chorus there. And I had sung through my high school and even junior high. I loved music and was very into music and largely singing. So I joined the chorus, but that was the first time in college where I sang classical music.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So to me, that blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I thought, I can't not do this. So I switched from English to music. And I will say, my parents were supportive. We didn't have, they weren't supporting me. I was paying for this with every kind of option that there was,
Right.
many jobs and loans and, what do they call those other things? My mind is blanking. This is also why I write, because you can stop and think about the word scholarship. That's the word.
Scholarship, right? Oh, that word.
Yes,
right.
That's the word. So I then became a music major, and then my little story, and then I was at Northeastern, so they had co-op then.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I think they still have it now, but I think it's changed its shape. But anyway, and then I got a job in radio, and so that was
In Boston?
in Boston.
In Boston.
Yeah, so I was at WGBH in Boston.
Oh, wow.
For decades.
That's
and
amazing.
that opened up my world, and I was like, this is really cool. I get to be involved with classical music. I don't have to perform. I was never a performer. So I feel like through reading your book, there's so many commonalities of a deep love for music and what music is, and living a life that has to do with doing something that's meaningful, that's inside of you.
You said something really interesting, though. You said, I couldn't not do this. And when I talk to students, I said this last night, actually, at Mechanics Hall, art makers of whatever stripe, music. I'm sitting here in this incredible room filled with musical instruments, and I am so happy. I can't even begin to tell you.
I thought you would really enjoy it here.
I cannot even begin to tell you. Susan is sitting behind you, sort of smiling. And one of the things that I said is that we are the art-making species.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We're the storytelling species. And in whatever manner it emerges, whether it's musical or visual or we're writers, and we can't not do it. We can't not do our thing. And I've had people say to me, oh, well, I knit or I cook. And that's not really the same thing. And I always say to them, no, actually it is.
Yeah.
Because if you are cooking, and even if you don't like to cook, but you're standing in the kitchen and you're cooking, you are standing there with all of the people who have stood there before you. And all of the stories that come out of the kitchen, and culturally, it's usually women. So parents, mothers, grandma, not in my case, my mother's a horrible cook, but, grandmothers and aunts and community members, and the same thing with knitting and the same thing with sewing. And that's what we do. We make art going back thousands of years, So when you say we can't not do it, when I was first handed that journal, I was coloring with crayons at that point in my life. But I vividly remember being so compelled by the possibility of a blank page on which anything could happen. And I still feel that way. When it's not terrorizing me, I still feel that way.
Right.
And it's because I can't not do it.
Yeah.
You know?
The potential is such a huge thing. And I love hearing that you love the blank page, because we sort of hear, oh, the blank page. But I can understand that too. I mean, sometimes I go, what is it that I really am trying to say, which is, one of the big questions. But I love that I must do this.
Yeah.
And I mention it on this podcast frequently, but I have a little girl diary that was my first given to me. And
with the lock and the whole thing.
It didn't have a lock, and I was really mad about that because I thought, I've seen those other ones with locks, and I did not. And I wrote on the side, do not look private.
Do not open.
Yeah, do not open. And each day it's like January 1st, January 2nd, January 3rd. And so I wrote in it for many years. So eventually, and I didn't write every day. So there's tons of blank pages, but there were plenty that I'd be like, this one's 1977, or this one is something else. But the thing that I marvel at, again, in this category of like, what must we do? The very first entry for me was on the day that I learned how to read music.
Wow. That was just by happenstance?
That was just by happenstance.
That's incredible.
So I went back I found it after we had moved, and I looked at it, and I was thinking about journals in the course of doing this podcast when I first started talking with people about writing. And when I looked, I was like, oh my God, I learned how to read music today. And I think I said something like, I showed my friend who came over. She wasn't really all that interested.
Yeah, that's...
Oh well. That'll keep happening. Like, right. Who's interested?
That's so interesting, though, that that those two things happen at the same time. When I first started playing guitar, I was keeping journal. I mean, I started playing when I was 4, so I would say I started keeping a little girl diary. Somebody, one of my parents or my grandmother, gave me a little girl diary, and it had a tiny little key. And then I write about this in Permission. I came home one day from school, and someone with pinking shears had snipped it. And I can only imagine that it was my mother. I can only guess that it was my mother, because my mother needs to be in control of all the information all the time. And my grandmother certainly wouldn't have done that. My dad wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But that was around the time that I was becoming really obsessed with music and with guitars. And I can talk about guitars until the cows come home. I mean, really.
Right.
Like in an abnormal kind of way.
Maybe we'll have a bonus episode that is the music edition, and we can talk about guitars.
We could do that.
Because Phil obviously has gazillions of them, and they are everywhere. And of all the instruments, he's learning cello now.
Incredible.
I tried to take cello lessons for a little while, and that's 4 strings I can wrap my mind around. But 6, I go, it's too many strings. I don't know. I can't manage it. It hurts my...
If you do tenor guitar, it's 4. So,
Oh, okay. And bass.
I could...
I tried for a very short time to play bass along with him, and he blew past me. I can do a 1, 4, 5, 1 in 1 key. But anyways. But they are intertwined in a creative way. So I want to jump to memoir. So when did you get to memoir? Or how did you get to memoir?
How did I get to memoir? I was always a writer of short nonfiction pieces. And I say that long before I knew what an essay was, and really understood what essays were. And I think I was in college, and I was reading Emerson, thanks to Linda Wells, and I hope she listens to this, because I think she'd really she's a dear friend of ours now, and I think the whole Emersonian essay thing was very front and center for me, because I was focusing really on American literature at the time. And I remember sitting in the George Sherman Union at Boston University thinking, oh, so that's what an essay is. Now
right.
I get it. And then I started reading people like May Sarton, and that sort of cracked the sky open a little. She sort of cracked the sky open for me a little bit. Yeah. And I don't really remember with any certainty what the first memoir was that I read, or my first understanding of this is what a memoir is. I certainly knew what an autobiography was, and they're vastly different. But I started writing essays for publication when I moved. Actually, my first essay for publication was in the mid-90s. And it was a piece that I had written about my grandmother, about my mother's mother, who was a lesbian and married to my grandfather, who was involved with a nun. But that's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other story. And I knew that my grandmother was a lesbian, and my grandmother had definitely certain, her radar was spinning about me. But I didn't talk about it because you didn't talk about it, and she didn't talk about it, but we both knew. And so I wrote this essay, and I submitted it to a small literary journal. It was in the mid-90s. I was working as an editor at HarperCollins at the time, and lo and behold, they published it. And then I thought, oh my God, what did I do? I'm now like naked walking down Main Street. My grandmother had passed many, many years earlier, but I couldn't not write essay, and I couldn't. I would come home from work in my coat, and I'd drop my bag, and I'd feed my cats, and I would sit down at my laptop and just start writing. And then I would look up, and it would be 10 o'clock at night, and it was sort of rinse and repeat. And I had days where, I would be at lunch and writing on pads, and I did that actually earlier in the late 80s, and I realized, I think, that I was writing these very personal stories that involved certainly myself, but other people as well, and they were highly experiential. And I realized that was a thing, that was something I was publishing, memoirs when I was at Harper.
Well, suddenly you're thrust into this whole wait a minute, this is going to be out there.
Exactly, and that moment is terrifying. That moment is terrifying. When I moved to Connecticut in 2000, I was very involved in the food writing world. I had worked as a cookbook buyer and seller at the original Dean and DeLuca. I was going to cooking school at night, and I was traveling every weekend, 5 hours round trip by train to see the person sitting behind you right now. And I would write on the train. I would read or write on the train. And I wrote an essay called Not Martha Stewart, which was about my mother's terrifying cooking sensibility. And I sent it to Northeast Magazine, which was the magazine section of the Hartford Courant at the time. And they called me while I had my first cell phone, and I was on the train. And they called me and said, we want to publish it, and we're giving it a whole tabloid-sized page, and we're illustrating it. And I was like, what is going on here? And I just got sucked into the idea of storytelling as an actual possibility, as an actual, literary, creative possibility. And now, all of these years later, when I think about people like Caroline Knapp, who wrote Drinking a Love Story, and then her best friend, who was Gail Caldwell. Gail was the longtime head of the book section of the Boston Globe for many, many years, and they were best friends. And I read Gail's memoir, which is called Let's Take the Long Way Home, that turned my world upside down. It really changed everything for me. And the idea that it's really a possibility, it's a creative possibility, to be taken seriously. A lot of editors and naysayers love to hate memoir because it tends to wax and wane as a trend. Usually connected to some degree of narcissism. And I just fell in love with the possibility of storytelling that way. That's a long way of answering that question.
That's really interesting, and I love it, and it really touches on so many things that I think about a lot with I feel like it seems weird to say living a creative life. Like, to me, those are words that mean something else. Because as you say, like, you can have a passion, you can have a thing that you can't not do. But then there's also, I mean, obviously, there's tons of craft and hard work and writing thousands and thousands of pages over time that get to the thing that you go, oh, this is it.
Yes, yes.
And there's no shortcut for that.
There was no shortcut. I have tried.
Yeah.
And it's not there.
Yeah. It's, and I don't know, in my, wisdom that I've come to at the age of 57, I say, I don't want to shortcut it. Like, I feel like there's so many trends of like, what are the tips and tricks for this? Or how can I get to this in 3 easy steps?
Yes.
And I go, I don't want to get there. Like, can it take me 10 more years, please? Because it takes a long time.
It does. Yeah. It really does. And I'm really glad that you said that, actually, because I am forever being asked for, what are your 3 tips for blah, 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 blah. And I get it. I as a teacher of writing, I get it. I understand it.
Right.
And people, whether we're creative, we're all creative, but actively creating or not, people don't like to be frustrated. People don't like to be creatively frustrated.
Exactly.
Frustration is not a good feeling.
Right.
And squirming is not a good feeling.
No.
We also live in a world of instant gratification.
Oh, yeah.
And I have told many students, please do not submit your manuscript to me typeset, with the help of Microsoft Word, because it's not there yet, when you do that, your brain is envisioning it in its final form, and it's nowhere near its final form,
Right.
But the craft and the process can be really unnerving and exhausting and so gratifying at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I could keep talking about all this, but maybe we should get to some reading. I don't know. Does this make sense to take these giant, it's like we dive in and then take some giant leaps, and I have like 5 million notes
questions
and everything. I think I'm going through it. But okay, so Permission, which is your book right now. So good. This book is so good. And one of the reasons I even started this podcast overall is to try and dig into some of these topics that you address so logically and sequentially in a way, like one leads to the next just perfectly. Or maybe not perfectly, because I don't think we should ever be perfect.
No, we're not perfect.
But it's just is this lovely sequence of like, oh yeah, and then this thing leads to that, and that leads to that. But a couple of the ones that pop out to me, I'm all over the map. You start the book with the concept of ownership, because clearly if we went from your early essay to 3 memoirs later and a book that is, it's sort of like a combo craft memoir and writing instructions, a writing class, because you built in a lot here that you, I think, teach as well.
Yeah.
So ownership is where you start. And I've heard you talk about this a few times, but you talk about these 8 lines that blew a hole in your universe. So I wonder if, to get into this, maybe you just tell about what that was and what happened.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard it described as blowing a hole in my universe, but that is absolutely spot on. So in 2013, I published my first memoir called Poor Man's Feast. And I was food writing at the time pretty exclusively. And when I say food writing, I mean I can write a recipe, that's fine. But it was really more about food narrative. What are the things that bring us to the table? What are the things that sustain us? Why? I'm endlessly interested in culinary anthropology. I would have majored in culinary anthropology had that been an option for me, and had I even known, to think about it way back when. So I was writing a lot of food essays and articles and things. But so 2013, I write a memoir called Poor Man's Feast, which was connected to a narrative food blog by the same name that had won a James Beard Award, and it was like a fairly big deal. And it was pretty much entirely narrative. And within the first couple of years of writing it, I definitely noticed that it was skewing towards family story. And I wasn't going to stop that. I just, if people wanted to not read it, that was fine. So the book comes out, and the book was real. It was a linear love story about me living in New York and meeting the woman who would become my wife. She lived in rural Connecticut. I lived on East 57th Street. We had two very different kinds of food sensibilities. I was living in Manhattan, and I had gone to cooking school, and I was very interested in making vertical, tall food, obnoxiously tall food. And Susan was, a connoisseur of poached eggs on toast. And so we were coming from things from different angles. And the book was about making the decision to leave New York after a year of being together.
Okay.
And moving full time to this town of 3,500 people, and really being married to this person long before same-sex marriage was a possibility. And the integration of our families, we come from very, very different backgrounds. And running through the book the core of the book was a question of sustenance. How do we sustain ourselves? How did I become so interested in food when I grew up in a home where my mom was a terrible cook, and my father was a wonderful cook, and that was sort of a general sense of their whole relationship, really. And how did we get to that place? And how did I get to a place where I was as obsessed by food and talking about food as I am about the musical instruments that I'm surrounded by in this studio? And I peeled the onion, and I got to a place, to the question of abandonment and what we do to fill the holes in our hearts and our lives. And in 8 lines, 3/4 of the way through the book, I told the story about how my father, in 1926, when he was 3 years old and my aunt was 8 years old, were abandoned by my grandmother, who was a fairly recent immigrant at that point. She had come over when she was 2 in 1900 from Central Europe. And so she didn't come home one day. And leaving behind my father and my aunt and my grandfather. This is a few years before the Depression, so my grandfather was holding down 2 jobs. He was also a very devout man, so he was involved in his religious community, and he certainly didn't know how to raise children, and so my father and aunt wound up in a series of foster homes and orphanages, and then they and my grandfather wound up being boarders, and now with Ancestry and 23andMe, there's evidence of that I could track by date, So I know that by 1930 she still had not yet returned, without question. So I write about this as the sort of the key that fit the lock of the need for sustenance for my dad, and how that was passed along directly to me. And a year later, I was excised from my family, completely excised from my family. Susan and I were godmothers to a cousin's child. We were no longer godmothers. We were cut out of every family function, every family holiday. I don't have siblings, so my cousins were as close to being siblings to me as actual siblings might be. Yeah. And I was stunned. And anybody who goes through a situation like that is stunned. But I was stunned because I didn't know that it was a secret. Right. And I didn't know it was a secret because my father talked about it every single day of my childhood. That was how he metabolized it.
Right.
He clearly had been told by his sister, by perhaps his parents. My grandmother did return to not talk about it.
Yeah.
And he was 3 years old, so he
Right.
had no way to live with it and to make sense of it and to metabolize it. And he used me effectively as a sounding board, for better or for worse.
Right.
It was what it was. A lot of people say, well, you shouldn't have done that. It was highly inappropriate, blah, 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 which is probably true. What I didn't know was that while that was going on, while I was growing up, my aunt hid it from her children. So when the book came out, one cousin was in her late 60s, one cousin was in her middle 60s. The older one kind of sort of knew a little bit about it, but the younger cousin in her mid 60s had no idea.
Wow.
And other extended family members had no idea. And so they were totally caught off guard, and I became a pariah. I became the wedge that drove a split,
Right.
between myself and them. And my head was spinning for years after that.
Yeah.
And it was that was 2013. And I mean, I went through grief counseling. It was disastrous. It affected me in a way that familial loss of all kinds affects a person. And my dad had been gone since 2002, so I didn't have him to talk to about it.
Right.
And I maintain that if he had still been around, the excision never would have happened. But I didn't write, I want to say, for about 3 years. I didn't think about it. I
Right.
didn't talk about it.
Right.
There was an enormous amount of shame over the excision. Like,
yeah.
oh my God, I'm this horrible
Right.
person. What did I do? I told this terrible family story that I should have kept secret. Well, I didn't know that it was a secret.
Right.
Nobody bothered telling me that. And it was only in 2016 that we can't not tell our stories. And I started to write about it.
Yeah.
And I wrote an essay about it for Krista Tippett, who had a blog on her
Yeah.
onbeing.org website. And Courtney Martin used to write for it, and Parker Palmer and Sharon Salzberg. And I sent this, it just fell out of me, this essay. I mean, I just wrote it and I sent it. And I thought, oh, they're never going to publish it. And we were at a wedding in northern Vermont, and my phone went off, and there was a message from them saying, we love it, and we're going to publish it. And I thought, oh, crap. Naked again,
Oh,
walking
I
down
know,
Main Street.
all these
Yeah.
great news that you're like, oh.
And that's a very real thing, I think, that every essayist and memoirist lives with,
Yeah. Might prevent some people from ever submitting.
Right. That's right. That's right. Exactly. Many of them. Yeah. So that was the story behind my asking the question,
Yeah.
what are the stories that we're allowed to tell?
Right.
How do we give ourselves permission? How do we ask permission? Should we ask for permission?
Right, right.
When is permission not necessary? Is it always necessary? I don't know. And I think it's a moving target. It differs for everyone. But that was the foundation behind the creation of this book.
So you started putting these pieces together at
Yes.
that point.
It was like when I started thinking about the book and starting to write more essays. I wrote another essay for the Rumpus about it. That actually wound up becoming one of the chapters in the book.
Okay.
It was like finding the corners to a jigsaw puzzle,
Yeah. Yeah.
and finding ways to build a story of both my, survival after this horrible experience and survival of abandonment, which is not disconnected from my father's survival of abandonment
Right,
and the
right.
way people metabolize something that's that traumatic.
Yeah.
And then I realized that there were so many people out there, so many writers and creatives who were going through the same thing.
Yeah.
At all levels.
Yeah, right,
all levels.
right.
Yeah.
So a question that I have that maybe we'll answer later, if that makes any sense to do, is exactly this trajectory, because when you talk about this, I think of what happened originally, even your grandmother's story of why she might have left and coming back, which she did, and your father absorbing this in some way, obviously when it happened, but there's the metabolizing that you talk about that we have to kind of go, whoa, what hit me? And then I think maybe him talking with you about this every day was maybe another thing in one of those categories of couldn't not do.
Right.
I mean, I think that feels... So it's this thing that gets passed along somehow inside of us that lives, and it has its own life.
Yes, it does. Absolutely. It has its own life, its own texture, its own, there's a line in the book, I'll mangle my own line, where trauma and sorrow have their own smell, they have their own sensibility, they take on a life of their own. Yeah. So one of the big questions that you pose is risk, and you have a chapter on risk and what are we risking. And I was wondering if maybe I might read a tiny part of that before we get to what you read, because I love it so much and it's such a good question. And you put the stakes so sharply that it scares me to death. I'm sorry.
I mean, and we had to have that story. So I'm going to start. It's on page 58, if you're curious. I feel like one of those, like, and on page 58, you said. So after the excision, as you describe it, you contacted your aunt again, which was not anticipated. And I think that you go into like this being a difficult thing to decide to do, but you did.
Yes.
So I'm going to just read through the end of that chapter. 6 months after my book came out, I phoned my aunt, then in her 90s, to wish her a happy Jewish New Year, as tradition requires one does with the oldest member of the family. We hadn't spoken since the publication. "It was very brave of you to call me," she said coldly. "But your story was not yours to tell," she added, taking nearly an hour to explain how I had single-handedly destroyed our family by revealing a truth that she had spent almost a century concealing, convinced all the while that she had been successful, even as her brother had fed me the story from the time I could understand words. "I loved you," my aunt said to me at last, and then she hung up. She would never take my calls or speak to me again. Rejection is a key part of our core history, and as James Baldwin promised, one that I would write about over and over until it became clearer and clearer, narrower and larger, more and more precise. As in Abraham Verghese's The Covenant of Water, in which a single family loses a member to drowning in every generation. In my family, themes of primal rejection play out repeatedly in the narrative of our lives over the course of a century. This was the story I was meant to write, and the reason I believed I was placed on this blue marble, to break the chain and free myself and anyone who comes after me from the strictures of shame encapsulating the myth of a mother who abandoned her husband and children almost a century ago. Through my writing about her, she has morphed from a one-dimensional, tiny Sabbath-keeping demon to a perfectly imperfect human, a woman stuck in the bardo between the old world and the new, grasping for some semblance of power and self-knowledge, and utterly devoted to the music that might have saved her. In writing it, this is what I learned, and what every writer learns when they honor the need to tell their story. When we move from silent to the spoken, we shed light on and create life where there was darkness and shame. Still, the most difficult decision that any memoirist faces is whether or not our own kernel of truth is important enough to the story to honor and share. Without that kernel, a memoir has no soul. And with it, we risk everything. Oh,
It's good for a couple of therapy sessions.
I mean, this is one of those moments I go, oh my God. Yeah, like you articulate it so beautifully, so perfectly. And you know, that concept that you write about the bardo, I love that. And I think about, these are the things that I think about that go in between times. Like she was in between worlds. But there are also these in between times where you couldn't write, where you were thinking. And I think thinking is as hard, if not harder, than some of the actual writing.
Yeah.
And I just wonder what you think about that bardo time. Like, we might need more time to understand, as you quote James Baldwin, like to make it narrower. Like, what is that slice that I'm trying to say? But it's painful too.
It is, and I think the Irish have a phrase called "thin places," you know, and they don't. I don't believe that they mean. It doesn't mean exactly what the bardo means, but it's almost means sort of liminal, liminal space. And the bardo, I am profoundly compelled by the concept of the bardo.
Me too.
And I always have been. And I think that we exist there more readily than we even realize, because we don't walk around thinking, unless you're George Saunders, you don't really, walk around, or Sharon Salzberg, you don't really walk around talking about it. But my grandmother was very much in the bardo. She had one foot in the old world and one foot in the new world. She had one foot in life as a musical prodigy. She had been a pianist when she was 14, played on the stage of Town Hall, Chopin, brilliant. And then I believe when she married my grandfather, the music went away. And this is all conjecture, but everything leads me to this place, and has led other people to this place without my sharing, this belief with them. And when you live in the bardo, where your life is neither this nor that, you grasp at anchors. You grasp for the anchor. And for my grandmother, I believe the anchor was music. Yeah. And so when, certainly throughout the course of my life, the thing that I never heard anybody say ever was, why did she leave? Was it because of abuse? Was it because she fell in love with someone else? What was she just unhappy? Was she severely clinically depressed with postpartum depression? What was it? Because postpartum depression runs like a river through that side of my family. What was it? And everyone was quick to turn her into a pariah without asking. And this is the plight, I think, of so many women. Yeah. So many women who make incredibly difficult decisions all the time. No one stops to ask why they're making the decision, So she was between this place and this place. And when she returned home after 3.5, 4 years, there was a baby grand piano sitting in the living room waiting for her. And this was, in the early 1930s, so at the height of the Depression. Yeah. My grandfather, was a newspaper man making, a quarter a week, basically. Right. So that was how she existed in the bardo. For me, as you say, I spent a lot of time thinking about this story and my place in this story and my father's place in this story and how it affected him and how it was affecting me and how it was going to continue to affect me and to continue to change my life. Was I still a member of my family? Was I not a member of my family? Was I ever going to be able to write again, or was I not going to, that sounds wrong. Was I not going to be able to write again? And I try and be benevolent, but I think that the people at the core of the excision, they were in the bardo also, because very often I would get a random email from one of them, and so I was there but I was not there. I was alive but I was not alive. And that defined my life for years after the story came out. What is the truth? What is fact? All of those things, those are things that swing on the hinge of, it could be this or it could be that. It's not definitely this and it's not definitely that, which are all sort of Bardo-esque,
Right.
But living in a place where you are a writer and your response to trauma like this is to create and to tell the story, even just for yourself, and to not do it means that, to me, that, you're neither alive nor dead, And for me, during that period of time, I was neither alive nor dead.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think of it as this energy that's sort of like swirling inside of us. And it doesn't know where to go.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We can't intellectually, cognitively send it anywhere. But it has to do its tempest thing.
It does, and I think that we get into trouble when we try and capture it and force it into a certain shape or a certain visual. I was talking last night in Portland about the problems with perfection and perfectionism, and that plays a role in this book, and that also plays a role in that story. As many immigrant families experience, there was a sense that they had to be, quote unquote, just as good as everyone else. And they had to be possibly even more, more perfect. And so as humans, whether immigrants or not, we are invested in the way the world sees us. And so we create veneers for ourselves. We create, these sort of armor-like patinas that we move through life with. And when someone comes along and puts a dent in the armor, that can do an enormous amount of damage. But trying to force that swirlingness into a shape, it's like often trying to jam a square peg into a round hole.
Right.
It's very hard just to let who we are and let our stories just be and become clearer and clearer to us on their time, not necessarily ours.
Yeah. I loved the description you gave. I think you had said when it was for Trafe, trying to stuff an octopus into a bag or something.
trying to stuff a live octopus into a pillowcase.
A pillowcase.
Right?
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do marvel at what that is, because it is, it's a mysterious force all its own, and it's this energy, and it's very real, yet it's so, it's invisible.
It's amorphous.
Yeah. All right, let's have you read. Why don't we have you do that?
I'm going to have a little sip of water.
Yes, please.
And then
what I thought would be great for you to read is your chapter on intent and motivation, that sort of does deal with this swirl and how and what it is and what to do or maybe not to do with it, perhaps.
Sure.
So whenever you're ready.
Okay. So I'm just going to start with the epigraph for this chapter. We turn to stories and pictures and music because they show us who and what and why we are, and what our relationship is to life and death, what is essential, and what, despite the arbitrariness of falling beams, will not burn. Madeleine L'Engle. Why do we write what we write, paint what we paint, sing what we sing? Why do the stories we want to tell become the subjects of our own obsessive minds? Why are writers attracted to the illicit, the creatively dangerous, the stories we've been told not to tell? What is our intention when we make art? What motivates us? In How to See, the painter David Salle writes, "Intent is very elastic. It can stand for a variety of aims and ambitions. What has a greater impact on style is how an artist stands in relationship to his or her intention. How someone holds the brush will determine a lot. Intention does matter, but the impulse guiding the hand often differs." It is uncommon for a writer embarking on a new project to allow it to take its own breath and inhabit its own shape, although my novelist and poet friends will likely disagree. Musicians, however, find themselves in this place all the time, where rhythm and sound and pacing are often steering the ship, and the musician is there to pay close attention to what the art wants to be and to be a conduit to getting there. Will this be a takedown like Mommy Dearest? An acquaintance asked right before my memoir, Motherland, was published. I was aghast. I hadn't even considered that it might be likened to the no-holds-barred memoir/expose written by Christina Crawford about growing up in an abusive household with her adoptive screen star mother, Joan Crawford. When the book came out in 1978, it was widely considered sensationalist, hyperbolic, scandalous. My answer to the question was a firm no. My mother and I had and continue to have a difficult relationship even now, but I was writing the memoir to peel the onion and examine what parental obligation truly means and what it looks like to have to return to a mentally ill parent's side after that parent experiences a cataclysmic accident that renders them helpless. This was my intent going in, but because the book was written while the story was unfolding, I never knew what was lurking around the next corner. Landmines everywhere. The book had to be written with as open a mind and heart as I could possibly muster. A tall order, considering that my mother and I were emotionally estranged at the time of her accident. And so my purpose in the writing was not complex. Put these two startlingly different, hot-headed women with a long history of enmity together, a hyper-heterosexual glam queen, former television singer mother, and her bookish, taciturn, chubby lesbian daughter, and make sense of it. Watch them age in tandem, unravel it, make meaning from it. Craft a story that was hopefully well-wrought, authentic, balanced, and fair. And always bear in mind those words of wisdom spoken by Dorothy Allison. If you're going to write a character as an asshole, you'd better be ready to write yourself the same way. When Christina Crawford wrote Mommy Dearest, her intent was perhaps fluid, a moving target. Was her intent to crack open the heavily shellacked Hollywood image of the perfect mother to reveal the breathtaking abuse that lay just beneath the surface? Was her intent to write a story of her own resilience and survival in the face of unthinkable cruelty? Was her intent to write a story that would earn her a sizable chunk of money as a form of revenge against Crawford? In her book, who was the primary character, the author or her mother? Likewise, what was Honor Moore's intention when she set out to write a memoir of life with her father, Bishop Paul Moore, in which she would reveal his bisexuality? Intent is a plan, however well or badly executed, to achieve a goal. Motivation, though, is different. In the words of Tibetan Buddhist scholar and author Thupten Jinpa, what separates intent from motivation is deliberateness. He writes, "Motivation is the drive that moves us, and that drive can wax and wane. Intent, however, is deliberate, the grand gesture of the work," says Rick Rubin in The Creative Act. Intent is your own internal truth about the work you're setting about to do. Whenever a student tells me that they are working on a piece of difficult writing over which they have struggled, it might be revelatory, it might be salacious, it might have at its core anger over an ancient transgression that fundamentally changed the foundation of their lives or the lives of others. It may speak what has been unspeakable. I ask them to consider this and to consider it carefully. What is your intent? What goal are you trying to achieve? And then I ask them, what is motivating you? What is driving you toward that goal? Most important, I want them to think about what will happen if the intent changes as the piece unfolds and evolves organically, thus altering the motivation, because it will. The art-making process requires a particular degree of flexibility that humans do not naturally possess when we begin the process of writing, or creating anything for that matter, with intent. We get grabby, we get cravey, we want to write what we want to write. We sit ourselves down with a plan of action, even if that plan just lives in our heads and hearts. We're going to write this story this way with the intent to achieve this goal. Damn the torpedoes, we are going to tell our truth. So we begin the work at hand, and we work and work. We make the time, we quiet the noise, and if we are lucky enough, the core truth of the story will begin to reveal itself to us. We have to listen for it very carefully, as George Saunders says. But this is a universal truth about the art-making process. Nothing is going to be freed up to reveal itself unless we drop the reins, let go of the steering wheel, take our foot off the brake, unless we let go of the side of the pool. We all know what it's like. As children, we hang onto the pool's concrete edge, kicking our feet, practicing putting our head in the water, and learning how to breathe. And then, after a time, someone comes along and tells us to let go. After much whining and whimpering, we do. We move toward the center of the pool, splashing and spluttering, completely out of control, terrified that we're going to sink to the bottom like a stone. But we don't. Applied to the creative process, when we let go of the side of the pool, we're heading into the unknown. We're stepping into a place where, perhaps, the writing or composing or painting has taken on a life of its own. Perhaps the narrator's voice has changed from previous drafts. Perhaps the composition has shifted from a major to a minor key. Perhaps the painter has been moved to paint over what they began a week earlier. This is when the work at hand begins to come alive, to take shape, even if it's a very vague, very strange shape. This may not happen immediately or even close to immediately. I was writing the third draft of my second book, Trafe, when I came to the realization that the book was not about what I thought it was. I had a deliberate plan for it, an intention, and in the earlier drafts I had shoehorned it into a shape to comply with that intention. It would not behave. Writing it as I had originally intended was like trying to stuff a live octopus into a pillowcase. With every draft, it changed organically, as though it was a living, breathing thing that had taken the car keys away from me. By the time I had a finished manuscript, Trafe was a very different story, one that was more about my immigrant grandparents than myself, and how every one of us, regardless of our backgrounds or ethnicities, wrestles with issues of assimilation and the grief of relinquishing the old for the new, the ancient for the modern. In the writing, I came to the place, without looking for it, where I finally understood my grandmother's utter obsession with music and what might have been her life's work had she not become a mother, and how my father, as a small child who had been briefly abandoned by her, sought comfort and sanctuary in the Chopin that she played for him alone as her audience in late afternoons before her husband came home from work. At a certain point during the writing, I had to step back from the manuscript and ask myself, what is my intention here? What is my motivation? Is it still the same? It wasn't. It couldn't have been. And what I discovered was that creative intentions and motivations are not only mutable by their very nature, they must be. Woe to any creative who believes that the end result of their work is going to be exactly as they intended it to be at the outset, and the getting there just as they carefully mapped it out. Art making is an act of bravery. When we let go of the side of the pool, we release ourselves from the creative preconceptions that hold us and our work back, and give our work permission to change. Oh, Lord.
So good.
Thank you.
What if we refuse to let go of the side of the pool? You picked an analogy that I might say stopped me in my tracks, because in my prior episode, having a conversation with my friend Nina Lichtenstein, I ended up reading a story that is a piece of some of the stuff I've been working on about me being afraid to jump in, and me being, and it was like literally my swimming metaphor was was it. And it was a little like a moment. I'm like, I can't let go.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a bardo.
Yeah.
And the energy is swirling. So now what do I do?
I think letting go at the side of the pool is one of the hardest things that we can do. I mean, certainly if we think about it literally, we usually learn to swim when we're in single digits, and it's terrifying, and where our parents keep us from the idea of drowning forever. They put up fences around pools. They put water wings on us. They make us wear floaty devices and, and all of that. And then they say, let go of the side of the pool. And we're certain, because they've told us we're going to drown.
Yeah, really.
Is that we are going to drown. And in fact, that's not always the case. And so, what happens when we don't let go of the side of the pool? We splutter and we splash and we fight and we do all of those things that keep us from being free, Yeah. And usually, I've got obviously a lot of metaphors for that moment, but letting go of the side of the pool, we have all been there. And if you look at a kid at that moment, when they let go of the side of the pool and they stop fighting and they realize that they're swimming, there's this moment of profound, excitement is the wrong word, but it's this almost primal joy that is them moving into the next phase of their lives.
Yeah.
And the same is true with art making. When we do that moment when we've written something that has been terrorizing and torturous, and it's been like an anchor, like a ball and chain, and we let go of it, and we're willing to work through the terror and the agony, and we get to the other side of it, and there's this moment of, oh, now I understand. Now I get the story. Not only do I get my story, but I get the story of all the people who came before me, who informed my story. And maybe I'm supposed to be writing this because I am supposed to be the person to do that, as a storyteller.
Yeah.
I don't think that the story of my grandmother leaving could have ever been told by anyone else in the family, because it was so locked down and contracted and twisted and knotted that they just couldn't. They were terrified of it, and I was terrified of it too. But I believe that every one of us has a story that we must tell. And we often don't know why we must tell it until it lets us know.
Right. I mean, that just also makes me think of what I connect to profoundly is the idea that these stories are even generational. Like, there's the process of trying to find out what it is, but it lives in this amount of space and this amount of space and this amount of space and this amount of space. People can't see. I'm incrementally doubling the amount each time. I mean, frankly, the analogy that comes back to me as I think of it that way are like interval waves. Mm-hmm. You know, in a musical sense, there is a wave that resonates after an octave, and then I might get this kind of wrong, but like resonates again at a fifth and then a fourth. And that's how we get the whole musical scale. And obviously there's also microtones and all that. So there's like our story, and then the parent's story, and then the grandparent's story, and they all are connected.
They are all connected. Yeah.
And the energy runs through them all. And I am just fixated on this energy idea right now because I think, as you say, your parents couldn't have told that story. Mm-hmm. I think the energy was such at that interval in them that it wasn't going to be something, but you struck at that perfect fifth or whatever it was. I mean, and the story then came out.
Yeah.
And I want to say, I'm so sorry. I mean, because how painful. I mean, I just was like, that is brutal.
It was brutal. Yeah.
To have the thing that you must do be the thing that excises you from the people you love. Yeah. I mean, that is...
But isn't that, I mean, that we hear that, so that is so often the case.
Yeah.
Whether it's the thing we must do or the person we must be, you know, or the truth that we must live.
Right.
That, you know, that is our truth that excises us from family of origin or culture of origin.
Yeah.
In the broader sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel that is the human condition, you know, that is the human story.
That's why we're so connected to stories. I mean, I think it's why we can't get enough of hearing them either. Right.
And, you know, we are creatures of, you know, first oral tradition and then written tradition. And I always quote, you know, Rob McFarlane, the naturalist writer, to call him a nature writer is to pigeonhole him. He's just this brilliant poet who happens to write about the world and the environment and has changed so much for me about the way I think about the world. But in his book Underland, he talks about 10,000 years ago, someone walked into a cave and held their hand up to the wall and took a mouthful of ochre dust and blew the dust at their hand and left a handprint that says, this is my story. I was here. Remember me.
Yeah.
This is what we do. Like walking upright. This is what we do.
Yeah. I don't know of him, and I remember that quote from your book. And I think nature writing has become the next thing for me. Like, I was never interested in that. And I think there come times when that becomes the metaphor through which we can see things. So nature writing, I mean, it is to me what's all around us, especially once one moves from the city to a more rural place. You go, oh, wow, like I never considered birds before. They were always just pigeons. So,
that's funny.
But now you go, wow, they're really living their lives. Yeah. Like, that's really...
And they're harbingers, you know, of they're harbingers of change. And, you know, we had this one year where the hummingbirds showed up a little too early, and I got very worried and very upset. And I was like, I've never gotten worried or upset about this before.
Yeah.
But when you think about it, you know, we live in sort of exurbia. So we live in a house on a little over an acre, and my office faces the back of the house. And I was sitting at my desk the other day and I heard this call that I had never heard before. I didn't, and there's a wonderful app.
I know
called
it well,
Merlin,
yes.
and I turned Merlin on, as fast as I could. And it turns out that there's a family of Cooper's hawks living on and around our near our property. And it's just so extraordinary to live among these creatures who predate us, and see everything.
Yeah.
And we're all beneath them.
Exactly. Yeah, right.
And you get the sense that they're looking down going, oh, what the hell are those
What
people
are
doing?
they
What are they
doing?"
doing now, How are they screwing it up
Just
now?
let them be. Well, it's funny you say about the hummingbirds. Just we put out feeders, and we have been doing it since we moved here. And this year we put it out like maybe actually just about a week ago, when we were both thinking, Phil and I, it seems a little early. Now, I don't actually know what would be early for a hummingbird for us here, but as you can see, we're only just getting leaves
Now,
on the trees
yeah.
right now, barely, and we're into, almost double-digit May at this point.
Yeah.
And in Boston, we're at least a week, maybe 2 weeks behind Boston, I think. So we just keep waiting and waiting and waiting for spring to come. But when we put the hummingbird feeder out, and the next day there were hummingbirds.
Yeah.
And we were like, oh, wow. We didn't think they'd be here. We were so glad we put it out. Anyways, nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nature.
There are ways to look around, and I think that those are the ways to help your brain focus on something when all these other things are spinning, where this other energy is going on in the background, because we can't know. Another question I was going to ask has to do with naivete. It strikes me, and I hope you don't mind. Were you naive in thinking that this was something? I think naivete is a phenomena that resonates with me in not realizing what might be and playing a role historically.
Yeah.
But we can't know everything either. I don't know. I just don't know if you have a thought about naivete in the role within memoir writing and what role it might play. I don't know.
Yeah, I've often wondered that, myself, in terms of, was I naive in thinking that if I told the story, there wasn't going to be some sort of blowback. I thought that at the most, somebody would reach out to me and say, let's have a conversation about this.
Yeah.
But I never expected to be cut out of my family. That's just, it seems to be so extreme.
Yeah.
And I can't help but think that if a response is so extreme, so over the top, there's something else going on. There's almost always something else going on that has very little, if nothing, to do with you.
Exactly.
And if it was not going to be now, it was going to be another time. Something was going to come out another time.
Yeah.
And that was and is pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
In thinking about naivete, though, I think about Danny Shapiro once said, no one ever says, yay, there's a memoirist in the family, which is true. Nobody says excellent, applause, write more.
Yeah.
That's, please tell more stories.
Stop now.
That never happens. And knowing that there's a memoirist in the family, I think can probably be fairly terrifying. And, then, what is Anne Lamott's famous line? That if people wanted you to write more warmly about them, they should have behaved better. And yes, to a certain degree, but it's also a moving target. And in our naivete, we can never know for sure what a reaction is going to be.
Right.
He who shall not be named, the director who shall not be named, wrote a wonderful movie called Hannah and Her Sisters in 1985, I think it was. And there's a scene about 3/4 of the way through where the third sister, played by Diane Wiest, decides she wants to be a playwright. And so she writes a play using her very colorful family as fodder, as as characters, and passes it out to everybody. And the mother is like, oh my God, this is the most fabulous thing. I love the mother character. She's just a boozy old flirt, and blah, 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 blah. I think literally. And then the sister, played by Mia Farrow, is enraged. So, and this is like within minutes of each other, right? So, you never know.
Right.
And so I don't know if it's naivete or just lack of grounding underneath your feet in terms of how people are going to respond. I've heard stories of, people writing about their Aunt Dolores's roast chicken and that it was very good, and then the family comes back furious that they didn't say it wasn't excellent. It was just very good.
Right.
So that so there's that. And when we write memoir, we have to admit to a certain lack of control about over response.
Exactly.
And that's a terrifying thing too.
Yeah. And I think that the control thing is really another theme I've been thinking about lately, that we can know that there will be consequences, but we can't have control over what they're going to be.
Right.
Maddeningly enough.
Yes.
We try so hard to be accountable for everything, and yet somehow that still doesn't work.
Yeah, and we assume that people are going to read our work and read our stories in the manner and understand them in the manner in which they were intended.
Exactly, yeah.
And that rarely happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it can happen, but it's rare.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting that's the whole exercise of point of view.
That's right.
Like, what is someone else going to think about, or how, I mean, that one that you also describe about, like, how someone else would describe you.
Right.
I've tried to do that one before. That is not fun.
That
I think of every chore to do before sitting down to do that one.
Yeah. When I give that generative exercise to my students, that like panic
Yeah.
sets in. So,
well, naivete. It's one thing about behaving that way, which is how a context that I haven't mentioned that I'm thinking about, but writing about it. We know that we're not going to be able to know how our words will be received. And the other thing that I again loved was talking about Prince Harry. That was really something. I mean, he could predict that something was going to happen. And frankly, at your, mentioning of that, I thought maybe I'll give that memoir a try, because I can be a little judgmental, might I say, and I go, oh, do I need to read about the royals? But
yeah.
After your story about him, I thought, I think I need to check that one out.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I was just talking, when we were in Portland, we were staying with some very, very old friends, my best friend from college and her husband, and we were talking about this over dinner last night, after the event in Portland. And interestingly, I've had an enormous number of people say to me, you got texts from Prince Harry? And I said, no, I did not get texts from Prince Harry. He does not have my cell phone number. He doesn't know that I'm alive. But, I was in residency at Barnswallow in Rockport, and it was January and beautiful. I mean, anyone who has not been to Maine in coastal Maine in January, it's not for everybody, but it was definitely for me.
Beautiful.
It was gorgeous. Yeah. And Prince Harry was everywhere, and the story was everywhere, and he was showing up everywhere, and he gave an interview to Anderson Cooper, who I like very, very much, and he was extremely thoughtful and not interested in the salacious at all.
Right.
And I was sitting at a restaurant by myself in Rockport, and my phone started to buzz wildly. And I realized that I was getting all of these notification alerts, like Yahoo,
all right.
and
I gotcha.
And
right.
People. Not that I subscribe to People, but I have, but not anymore. Yeah. And it was like one after the, it was right after the interview came out. And I was like, oh, God, okay, I'm going to have to watch this interview.
Yeah,
and so,
I see.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. And so I went back to the apartment.
I thought the same thing. I thought, wow, Prince Harry is calling her.
Yeah, no. He wasn't calling me. We
Nonetheless.
have one person in common.
Oh, right. Well,
but
yeah.
not he was not calling me. But watching him and you can watch this on YouTube, watching his face and watching his body language.
Right.
I couldn't help but think, and I was finishing this book. I was finishing the writing of this
Right.
book at the time I was
Yeah.
there. Watching him, you couldn't help but think, what did he expect? What did he expect was going to happen after blowing the lid off family stories that have been kept under lock and key
Yeah.
since William the Conqueror?
Right.
Since like
know.
1066.
Yeah.
That's a long time. But
Talk about energy through generations.
right, watching his physicality, he was clearly not someone who was setting about to hurt people. He was tremendously sorrowful.
Yeah.
He was just completely undone by what had happened. But I was listening to him, and I kept thinking, but what did you think? What did you think was going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was just so much other
stuff. Yeah.
And at our cores, I mean, our parental acceptance and need for validation, and it lives within us.
Yes.
So you hope, but yeah, I think there's also like, yeah, what did you think? I don't know. Well, I started listening to it because I like what you say about observing someone's demeanor, because I am a huge advocate, proponent of what gets heard in our voices is what gets put on the page plus.
Yes.
And so to hear, I am just the biggest fan of listening to people read their own work, truly. So I've started that one next.
Yeah.
There are so many other questions, and I can't keep you forever. You do have to go home today at some point. But I can't have you leave without asking, what was most you've had a lot of daring things and thought a lot about this. What was the most daring thing about this book?
The most daring thing about this book was writing about what other people had done. Because these people they have been very, very dear to me. I assumed that I was very dear to them. Right. I don't know if that's true. Yeah. I don't know if that was ever true. And I'm inclined to think now that it was not. Because as I said earlier, when you think about the extremes of response and extremes of reaction, if one of my students came to me and said, this is something that happened, and I'm devastated and I can't continue on, and I'm going to stop taking your class and I don't want to write anymore because it's just too dangerous, I would say to them, there's something else going on. There's definitely something else going on. And I believe that that's probably true, but I also think that it made me writing this book and exposing and revealing. It was more, exposing right. and revealing what had happened with these people who I had loved for so many years and who I thought loved me for so many years. Exposing that and revealing the fact that our relationship might have been built upon falsehoods was devastating. That was the thing that undid me more than anything else when I wrote this book. Coming to that realization that I might in fact have been an obligation to them because I was my father's daughter. And it's also why I say that had he been alive when all of this was going on, it likely would not have happened. But that was the hard, for me personally, that was the hardest thing. For me, in a more general sense, there is an enormous responsibility in leading new writers, leading any writers to a place of telling the truth. And that is, it's awesome, and I don't mean awesome necessarily in a good way.
Yeah.
It is frightening and it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
And I do not take that lightly at all.
Right.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking one more.
Sure.
At my core, I'm an optimist and a person that leans toward hope. Do you ever hope against hope that maybe they will hear you?
I did early on. You know, I really clung to that. And I clung to it in a way that can only be described as desperate. So there was a desperate need for me to be understood through these words and for them to also understand all of us as a family through these words, because abandonment in our family is the family theme, and it runs through the family like a river, and it flows over the rocks of generations and keeps going, and it never dries out. It just is moving water. And it has touched every one of them in profound ways. And when I wrote this book, I was able to really take a step back and see that. It's like looking into a diorama. I was able to really see that and see it clearly. So I hoped that they would read it closely enough to really fathom that. When a person is in their 60s and 70s, and, you know, my aunt passed at 102.
Wow.
When Poor Man's Feast came out, it would have been my hope that, you know, they all would have thought about it before responding to it in the way that they did, but they couldn't. It was just beyond their ability to. And where we are now is the person who was at the core of the excision, to whom I was very, very close, is a very, very strong personality. And I labored under the belief that anything was possible. Maybe we could find a way to come back together. I even at one point considered suggesting a mediator, you know. My family is riddled with lawyers, you know, who I am still close to, you know, but I realized that that's never going to happen, and that every exchange with this person since Poor Man's Feast came out has been alternately abusive and slightly less abusive. That's the game, you know, it runs the gamut.
Yeah.
What was it, Dorothy Parker from, you know, ran the gamut from A to B, right? And so I realized in the last year that I was probably going to have to go no contact with her. And so I have gone no contact with her and her daughter and her husband and her son-in-law and on, because every exchange became really intensely cruel and fraught. And I just couldn't do that. I mean, I'm 61 years old, and I have knock wood, I have a very good life with someone I love, and a lot of animals and music and writing and amazing students, and I get to do what I love doing. You know, I know that you understand that, you know, what I love doing most of all, best of all. And sometimes you have to step back and move on. Yeah. And I have had to do that, you know. I've had to do that.
Well, I mean, what you have to say comes from such a profound place of wisdom and experience, and love. I mean, that's just very evident in what you've written, and in this great chance to talk with you. So I feel the responsibility that you talk about very, very sharply, and I think it's one of the most important things that we can share is who we are with one another in whatever creative way it needs to be expressed. So,
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has just been a gift of a conversation. So truly, truly grateful.
oh, so many deep sighs I hear in myself through this whole conversation. And what a trajectory to come through from feeling this theme of family abandonment and moving towards a generosity of sharing the experience with us, with other writers, other readers who can get so much from it and hopefully take that energy that I was thinking about and infuse that into our own writing somehow. What are the themes that we are working on individually? Well, clearly, I must go back and read Poor Man's Feast. I see how this was the start of her journey of this multi-memoir endeavor. I want to read that. I want to read Trafe. I definitely want to read Motherland. To move through such damaging and traumatic life experiences that came out from those 8 lines, it's more than a story. It's life experience that she couldn't not do. It's living the life that she couldn't not live. And as I think about this, I am thinking of at least 2, maybe 3 times in my life when I couldn't not do something. And those are the things I do struggle with trying to write about the most. So why can't I let go of the side of the pool? That is one question that still remains unanswered. All right, well, big gear shift from musing writer Michelle to podcast host Michelle. There is a link in the show notes for you to find Elissa Altman's book, Permission, as well as her Substack, Poor Man's Feast, which she prolifically posts at. There are also more dates coming up on her book tour, which includes a stop in Provincetown, Massachusetts in early August, and additional dates coming up in Maine as well, and the West Coast. So all of this is available at her website, and I will include a handy link for that for you to check out any or all of those things in the show notes. Continuing in full-on promotional mode now, I want to invite you first to follow this podcast so you always get the next episode when they drop each month. Please sign up also for my newsletter, my own writing that I dare to share, usually loosely connected to a topic of discussion from this month's podcast episode. It is called The Redo, and you can get it at my website, michellerado.com. And, well, I still have that promotional hat on. Remember Betsy Armstrong, who I spoke with in April, 2 episodes back? Well, her audiobook of The Mother of All Decisions is now available. Look for it at Audible or Libro FM or any of the other audiobook listening apps. I am so proud of that production we did together. All right. I think I've probably kept you long enough. First, thanks to Elissa Altman and her wife Susan Turner for visiting Phil and me at Flying Pig Farm. A huge thank you, as always, to my often-mentioned musician husband Phil Rado, this time for his studio and production accommodations, and always his music, which bookends each episode. Finally, my deepest appreciation to you, since you have stuck with me to the bitter end here. So I hope you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. Thank you for daring to listen. I'll catch you next month.
And nothing's gonna break my fall. There's nothing in the protocol. It's like swimming up waterfall or taking away the ground. Taking away the ground. It's like taking away